Hi everyone, and welcome to the next video on lessons from Capablanca. This time we're going to look at a few things. First of all, the idea of winning by indirect attack. Capablanca writes, "We have so far given positions where the attacks were of a violent nature and directed against the king's position. Very often, however, in the middle game, attacks are made against a position itself, or against pieces, or even pawns." He stresses, "The winning of a pawn among good players of even strength often means the winning of the game. Hence the study of such positions is of great importance. We give below two positions in which the attack aims at the gain of a mere pawn as a means of ultimately winning the game. In the position before us here, black is a pawn behind, and there is no direct attack against white's king. Black's pieces, however, are very well placed and free to act, and by coordinating the action of all his pieces he is soon able not only to regain the pawn, but to obtain the better game. The student should carefully consider this position and the subsequent moves. It's a very good example of proper coordination in the management of forces. Capablanca and Fritz are, as usual, in agreement about the best move here for black. If you want to try and spot it, then stop the video now. Okay, the best move for black is the simple rook a8, immediately taking control of one of the open files and threatening to win the pawn back with bishop takes c3, and after white recaptures, rook takes a2. Although it would be unlikely for black to exchange his important dark square bishop, seeing as he's feeing shadow kingside, for the relatively weak knight on c3. Even considering that though, the threat still exists. So white plays a4, and Capablanca points out that this was not the best move, and that better was b3. After which would come knight takes d2, queen takes d2, rook a3, after which it will become impossible for white to hold on to his a-pawn, and black will have an advantage in this nagging pressure on the a-pawn. The rooks can double up, and if the knight ever moves, then the a-pawn's falling and the bishop's stacking the knight, so it's not going to last long. But the game move instead at this position, at a4, makes it much easier for black, because now he has knight takes d2, and after queen takes d2, black again can win back the pawn now by trading his bishop. But as we saw earlier in the series, bishops are generally better than knights, and so it's perhaps wiser to hold on to it. A stronger move is queen c4, and you'll see why in a second. White now played rook fd1, and again black can win back the pawn with bishop takes c3, but there's more to be had in the position, and it's better to apply more pressure on the queen's side, where black has a big space advantage in the form of these open files. The best move here is rook eb8, which is threatening rook takes b2, and after the rook recaptures, bishop takes c3. And to meet this threat, white played queen e3, but now black has the strong rook b4, which is threatening bishop d4, which would force white to give up the exchange in order to save his queen. And Fritz assesses black as about half a pawn better here, and being a pawn down, this speaks volumes about the strength of his position. To meet the threat that I just mentioned, white played queen g5, which is a blunder really. It was better to give up the exchange instead, as we saw before there, although of course black would probably win in that case. And now black is getting a winning position after bishop d4 check, king h1, and rook ab8, threatening to win the knight outright with bishop takes c3, where white would be unable to recapture with the b-pawn because his rook on b1 would be hanging, and he's pretty much forced to give up the exchange as the result of this with the rook takes d4. And after queen takes d4, black is definitely winning after, say for example, rook d1 and queen c4 with an advantage of well over 2 pawns. And compare this to the original position here, and being able to milk positions in such a way is very skillful chess. Many people would have been content with simply regaining the pawn when it was possible in the earlier sequences with the bishop takes c3 and then rook takes the a pawn. But as you can see, there's much more to be had in the position. Okay, on to our next example. Capablanca writes, an examination of this position will show that black's main weakness lies in the exposed position of his king, and in the fact that his queen's rook has not yet come into the game. Indeed, if it were black's move, we might conclude that he would have the better game, on account of having 3 pawns to 2 on the queen's side, and his bishop commanding this powerful long diagonal. It is, however, white's move, and he has 2 courses to choose from. The obvious move, bishop c4, might be good enough. Let's have a look. If bishop c4, pinning the knight and discovering a second attacker on it. So rook a d8 to defend the knight, and now b4 makes it difficult for black. If c takes b4, then knight takes d4, and he's in a bit of trouble. But let's go back to the starting position. There is in fact a much better move that completely upsets black's position, as well as winning a pawn and having a better position overall as a result. If you want to try and spot it, then stop the video now. Knight d4 is the move, threatening both the bishop on c6 and the pawn on f5. If the bishop moves, white will also have the initiative. After knight takes f5, it gets the knight to a strong square, and it's also attacking the queen, and it can bring his other pieces in for the attack very easily. In the book, black takes the knight, so let's see what happens there. After c takes d4, rook takes c6, and suddenly white is winning. Bishop c4 is now a strong threat, and the game continues with knight b4 to stop any danger there, but now white has bishop c4 check, and after king h8, rook e6, threatening the queen. So d3, rook takes d3 is okay, because if knight takes d3, then rook takes queen. And in this position, Fritz assesses white as being 1.75 ahead of black, and considering he's only a pawn up, it's a big difference even in terms of engine analysis, and these powerfully placed pieces compared to, the relatively passive rooks, especially this one. And the white has the initiative because the queen's going to have to move. It's a far better position for white. And Capablanca writes, these positions have been given with the idea of acquainting the student with different types of combinations. I hope they will also help to develop his imagination, a very necessary quality in a good player. The student should note in all these middle game positions that once the opportunity is offered, all the pieces are thrown into action en masse when necessary, and that all the pieces smoothly coordinate their action with machine-like precision. That, at least, is what the ideal middle game play should be, if it is not so altogether in these examples, although the one before us here is a good example because this rook is powerfully placed. As I said, white has the initiative, and the pieces are all, and the pawns as well, coordinating well. White doesn't have any weaknesses here really. This f pawn is weak for black, and the queen's tied to the protection of this knight. I mean, it doesn't have to protect it with its move now because the knight's not attacked, but then there's going to be, tactical weaknesses, and white can play a rook d6 or whatever he pleases. Once you get your pieces into a good positions, you've got many roads to victory. Okay, well, that's the end of this video anyway. I hope you enjoyed it and found it instructive. Please leave any comments or thoughts. Thanks very much.